Today we're going to talk about my favorite mix tricks and hacks for heavy music. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, I'm Cole Caparoon. Thank you for stopping by for another video. I appreciate each and every one of you being here. Now, since I am in Nashville, I do work on a lot of country music, but my background is 100% rock and metal. The most successful songs that I worked on were like hard rock. And so today I just want to quickly run through some of my favorite techniques for getting a wonderful, aggressive hard rock or metal sound. Every one of these techniques probably could be its own video, so I'm just going to slam through these. And if there's any of these that you want dedicated videos on, drop them in a comment down below. If it gets enough votes, maybe I'll do dedicated videos on each one of these. First up, parallel compression on drums. I always run all of my drum shells to 2 auxes. They have the exact same input, so all of the drum shells are equally feeding 2 buses or 2 auxes. I put compression on one of them and saturation on the other one of them. I'm compressing pretty hard because it's parallel, and I'm just kind of kissing it with the saturation on the other one. Next up, when I'm using kick and snare samples, I almost never use tom samples, but when I'm using kick and snare samples, I always run the actual kick and the kick sample, or the actual snare and the snare sample, to an aux, to a snare bus or a kick bus. And while I might fix problems on the individual kick or snare tracks, I always do all of my main processing, my main snare and kick EQ, and my main kick and snare compression on the bus that has both the original track from the drum kit and the sample in it. And I blend those two together, and this is one of the ways that I really make sure that it doesn't sound like my drums are ultra sampled, but you get all of that wonderful impact and clarity from samples doing it this way. I'm treating the mic'd up drum and the sample as one single thing. Next up is snare reverb. I'm always using either a gated reverb or a room reverb of some sort on my snare drums, but I don't just throw a reverb on it and let it ride. I always compress my snare drum reverbs. It depends on the song. Sometimes it's with the arouser, sometimes it's with an SSL style compressor, but I get like 4, 5, 6 dB of gain reduction on the compressor that's compressing my snare reverb. This is what helps make the snare reverb sound like explosive. And sometimes if I'm going after a really explosive sound, I will double up those compressors. I will literally just copy and paste the compressor, the same settings right below it, to get even more explosiveness on that reverb box. Next up is with toms. I always run automation on my toms, and I have a whole video going over drum sounds that I've detailed this technique on, but I always pull the volume down on my toms and I write in volume automation for every single tom hit. I don't pull the faders down to 0, but I pull them down so that way there's not a bunch of kit bleed and a bunch of cymbal bleed, a bunch of hi-hat bleed in the tom sound, so that way when the toms hit, I automate them up so they can be slamming, but without all of the bleed in there. We're gonna keep going on drums just a little bit longer. The next one is a trick that I heard Chris Lord-Alge talk about many years ago, that there is low end of the snare drum in the hi-hat mic. Boost up that 150 or 200 hertz, wherever the resonant frequency of that snare drum is, in your hi-hat mic, because there's power there. There's stuff to gain there. Use the other tracks in the drum kit to enhance the snare drum in the mix. Next up, let's move to bass guitar. I'm always saturating bass guitar. Just about always. Unless the song comes to me with a very distorted, grindy bass guitar, I'm adding more saturation to it. Sometimes it goes through a hardware chain, sometimes I use a plugin chain. My favorite plugins for this is the Kit Plugins BBN105. It's the Blackbird Neve kit. Boy, you flip both of those switches and crank that saturation up, give it some 1.5K and turn 100 hertz up, and oh, mwah, it's the best bass sound ever. More saturation on bass guitar so it cuts through the wall of guitars better. The next one is more of a production trick, but I'm always layering heavy guitars with dirty synthesizers. It's always playing the same riff or playing the same chord progression, but I'm always using some sort of a dirty synthesizer to enhance the thickness of the guitars. Now, my goal is usually not for anyone to even be able to tell that there's a synthesizer in there. My goal is usually just to augment it a little bit, just blend it up, tuck it under those guitars, and make them sound enormous. The next thing I'm doing is on screams. I'm always saturating screams. I EQ the scream, and then I compress the snot out of the scream, and then I multiband compress the scream, and then I add as much saturation as is appropriate for the sound that we're going for. This just adds to the whole vibe of any scream, no matter what style it is. As much saturation as I can get away with without it taking away from the vibe that we're actually going for in the song. Same thing kind of applies for the clean vocals. Now, I obviously use less saturation on the clean vocals than I do on screams, but I am saturating the snot out of every single aggressive vocal that I work on. Unless the goal is a very clean, poppy vocal over very heavy music, I'm almost always saturating it. Now, my favorite tools for saturating vocals are the Black Box HG2. I really like the Kazrog True Iron. I really like the Goodhertz Tube 3, and I'll put links to as much of this stuff as I can remember in the description down below. The next thing that is super important to me personally when working on heavy music is the 2.5 to 4K range on everything. I feel like you really have to get this range right, because too much and it sounds harsh. Heavy music is already on the verge of sounding harsh anyway. So there's a really fine balancing act between pushing enough of this 2.5 to 4K in there to make sure the clarity and the aggression is there, but never overdoing it so that way it doesn't sound more harsh than it needs to. Now there's no right or wrong here. Sometimes I'm cutting this range, sometimes I'm boosting this range. It really depends on what was recorded, what the sounds are actually like, what needs to happen in the mix. Sometimes I'm boosting this on a guitar and cutting it in a vocal. Sometimes I'm boosting it on a vocal and cutting it in a guitar. So I can't possibly tell you what to do with this range, but this frequency range to me is the most important in heavy music. There's nothing worse than an awesome heavy song that sounds too harsh to listen to because there's way too much 4K in it. And there's nothing worse than a super dull, lifeless sounding mix because someone was too afraid of this frequency range and pulled a bunch out. Next up, mix bus. Even more saturation. Now, this is something that I do on a lot of music that I work on regardless of the genre or how aggressive it is, but I'm almost always using at least 2 layers of saturation on my mix bus. I actually have a whole video dedicated to how my mix bus is set up, and the only difference between that video and what I do dedicated in rock and metal is there's usually an additional layer of saturation on my mix bus after those things. So I've got my signature preamps from Cappy that live on my mix bus that add size, color, saturation. And then depending on the song, I'm usually either going to the Rupert Neve Design MBT or the SSL Fusion, again, depending on what the right thing for the song is. But then I'm also usually in the back-end plugin world, I'm adding either the Kazrog True Iron or the Black Box HG2. I don't want the mix to sound distorted, but I'm using this to get as much RMS level out of the mix as humanly possible, the most LUFS, the most aggression, the most impact without using a limiter to do that. Again, I'll put links in the description down below for everything I mentioned in this video, in addition to a few other videos that I mentioned here in this video. So anytime you guys need any piece of musical gear whatsoever, you can jump on any one of my videos, click on any of the links in the description down below. Once you're on the site, you can purchase absolutely anything you need. It costs you nothing extra, but it goes a long ways to help support this channel, help me keep making content just like this. Those links go to Sweetwater. So thank you so much, Sweetwater, for sponsoring this video. Huge thanks to you guys for using those links anytime you need to purchase absolutely anything. It means the world to me, and it is a bigger help than you can possibly imagine. If there's anything in this video you'd like a detailed video on, drop it in a comment down below. And if you've made it this far in the video and you haven't subscribed yet, I feel like I've earned your subscription. So give me a subscribe, thumbs up, and drop me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.